Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us this morning. Let me start, first of all, President Reif, by thanking you for hosting and for all that MIT does, not just for people here in the Commonwealth, but around the world. And to Chairman Gabrielli and Secretary Pizer, and where's Commissioner Santiago? There you are. Thank you for grabbing this bull by the horns and running with it on behalf of the folks in our administration. And I want to thank all of the attendees for joining us today for this series of discussions about what I think is a very big issue for which we were probably early in the game, which is how do we, as a Commonwealth, given our rich and an important history as a player in education, find a way to maximize the opportunities associated with digital learning and innovation on behalf of our students, and frankly, our working people here in Massachusetts. And while I get today's conversation is focused primarily on higher education, I think it's worth noting that, the Lieutenant Governor and I are out and about all the time around the Commonwealth, and it almost doesn't matter where we are with respect to the job stack, so-called. We run into employers over and over and over again who say that their single biggest impediment to growth is their ability to find people who can work for them. And it's not all about PhDs and master's degrees and even bachelor's degrees. I mean, in many cases, if you talk to folks in the trades, there's a building boom going on around here. You may have noticed that. Thank you so much for your participation in that, Mr. President. But the simple truth is, that's not just true here. That's true all over Massachusetts. And you have all kinds of employers and unions and contractors and construction companies looking for talent literally across the spectrum. And I think in many ways, one of our greatest challenges as a Commonwealth is going to be figuring out a way to take advantage of all of this connectivity and all this online opportunity to ensure that people have the ability to access the educational opportunities that are going to make it possible for them to succeed in a constantly changing world. And I think in some ways, this is a cost question, but it's also an access question and it's a relevance question. And all three of those elements are going to factor into whether or not we truly succeed in making it possible for young adults and for older adults and for kids to be successful here in Massachusetts and in other places. Because let's face it, the other thing that comes with almost every conversation about this stuff is whatever we do here that works is going to have relevance in a lot of other places. And if you think for a minute just about some of the early pioneers in this space, like Khan Academy, no one thinks about Khan Academy as being an enterprise that operates only wherever Sal Khan and the gang happen to be. People think about that as a global educational tool. And it was fascinating to me. I saw a presentation on what Sal and those folks were up to about 2 years ago, and I watched an entire curriculum play out in front of me in Mongolian, and I don't speak Mongolian, but it was really interesting to realize that one of the great opportunities that comes with digital capability is spread. You have this tremendous capability to provide tools to people across a completely different universe than the one anybody ever might have thought was traditionally possible once upon a time. The second thing I just want to speak briefly to on this is this notion that both Chairman Gabrielli and President Reif talked about, which is finding a way to bring educational opportunities to people that work within the framework of their own lives and their own schedules. When I was in my 20s and 30s, there were sort of two ways you could play this game. One was nights and weekends, and the other was to literally walk away from work for some period of time to either complete the degree that you wanted to complete or to chase a new degree. And if you did the nights and weekends thing, you still had to go someplace. And where you had to go was wherever it was they were teaching it, at exactly the moments and the hours that they were teaching it. And typically that required employers, in many cases, to reframe their workday for people who were chasing these opportunities. And it was a very structured, limited set of possibilities and options. And one of the great things about some of the new tools and the new strategies that people are pursuing here is you have the ability to give people to bake this stuff into their life in a way that works for them, which was just simply not possible once upon a time. And with that comes tremendous opportunity to broaden the universe that's capable and able to participate fully in what's possible here. And I think in some ways, the other thing that comes about with respect to that is a way to think differently about how you educate somebody or how you teach them. And for me, my own personal experience, the best math class I ever took was the Kaplan course I took before I applied to business school. Now, that was a very long time ago, okay? But I still remember key elements of what I learned in that program. And part of the reason why I think that was such a good math class was because those folks knew they were going to have a very limited part of my day. They weren't going to get me 5 days a week. They weren't going to get any of us as students 5 days a week. They were going to get a bite at us on Tuesday and Thursday nights, and maybe we'd show up once in a while on Saturday to do some of the practice tests that were available to us. And we were certainly motivated because all of us knew that if we didn't actually figure this stuff out, we wouldn't be able to take the next step in whatever our careers were. But the simple truth is, the whole approach they took to teaching it was completely different to anything I'd seen before. And I think that's one of the other elements of this that's so important, which it's possible to create a way for folks to learn that simply hasn't been available historically to people. And depending upon how you learn and the speed with which you learn and the language that works for you and the approach that works for you, the possibilities here, folks, get pretty big. And I think as long as people are willing to think differently about how this all fits together, the opportunities, again, are enormous. The third thing I would say about it, I really believe people are going to do this, okay? Now, whether they do it here or they do it somewhere else, I absolutely believe people are going to do this. And they're going to do it because for a lot of people out there who are looking for an opportunity to advance themselves educationally and professionally, are going to be seeking these kinds of opportunities, and folks are going to respond to that by creating programming and educational options for them. And I would really want and like to see Massachusetts, because we have always been, rightfully so, a major player in the education space, to be a leader here and not just a follower. And I think in some ways the challenge for us, because we've been so successful in this space for so long, is being willing to acknowledge and come to the table and talk about the fact that what made us a leader 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago with respect to the way we chose to organize and structure what we did in education may or may not be exactly the right way to think about how to be a leader in this stuff over the course of the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And I think in some ways, we certainly have the chops to play big and play big in this space. And the challenge for us is going to be able to imagine and to think differently about what it was that got us here when we think about the tools and the capabilities and the student populations that we're going to be looking to try to serve successfully on a go-forward basis. The two other things I just mentioned quickly. We're an employer, Commonwealth of Mass. And I would say over the course of the past 3 years, on more occasions than you might imagine, I've had these conversations with people who work in senior leadership positions in our administration where they've been looking to promote somebody into a job opening. And they said, the perfect person for this is actually somebody who started working in the department right after they got out of high school. They never went to college, but their subject matter expertise is second to none. They've done every job in the department. There's nothing about the way this place works that they don't understand. They have terrific interpersonal skills. People love them. But there's a minimum qualification for this next position that they have to have a bachelor's degree or they have to have a master's degree. And they don't have either, okay? What do I do? And the answer is you either have to think differently about what your criteria are, or you need to create skill-based learning opportunities that can fill some of the gaps that a subject matter expert like that already has, who's a monstrous individual contributor, but may not have some of the stuff you'd really like to see that person have. So one of the things we did is we're starting to experiment with a variety of, they're not quite CBE type models, but they're very much along that lines, which is, teaching somebody how to understand a financial statement or build a budget or understand how organizational behavior works or communications. I mean, there's a whole bunch of very basic skill sets that come with being a successful manager, and they don't necessarily require you to have a BA or an MBA to get there. But because we've been so tracked in terms of how we've always thought about this stuff, we haven't necessarily been willing to take the pieces of the Rubik's Cube and think differently about how to organize it so that people who have earned the right, in many cases, to succeed and move forward can pick up the pieces and the elements that they need to pick up, plug them into what they already know, and continue to grow as an employee. And the final thing I'll just say is we get the fact this is complicated, all right? We get the fact that it's challenging. We also get the fact that, as I said at the beginning, I think we're in the early innings of a very long game. So one of the things we're going to do is we are going to put together a commission on this stuff to think hard about digital innovation and lifelong learning. We'll probably organize this around the Commonwealth Corporation. We'll bring in folks from the employer community, the education community, and a lot of the folks in the higher ed world to help us think about what we ought to be doing as a Commonwealth to support and encourage and invest in programming to chase these opportunities so that we can be, in fact, the leader we should be in digital innovation and lifelong learning. There's no question that the possibilities here are real. There's also no question that there will be folks who are going to jump into this with both feet and chase it hard. And we have examples of that already, whether you're talking about Southern New Hampshire, or you're talking about edX, or you're talking about the University of Arizona, or you're talking about Match Beyonds, all of whom are folks you're probably going to hear about or from at some point during today. The Match Beyond thing was particularly interesting to me. I went over and spent some time with some of the students there. And they're basically working, they're almost to a person. They were kids, first-generation college students for whom the traditional college approach didn't work for a whole bunch of reasons, some of which would sound very familiar to anybody who's ever talked to folks who are part of first-generation college families. They're working full-time. Match Beyond gives them both a curriculum that they can pursue, coaching and advice that they can take, and a place to go to create their own little universe of fellow travelers in the higher education space while they work. And they all said the same thing, which is, the traditional thing, it just was never going to work for me because I really need to work. Despite whatever the math was associated with scholarships and all the rest, I needed to work. And I think in some ways, that program model for a lot of kids and young adults is going to make a lot of sense. But it's one of what I believe is going to be many models that are going to end up developing over the course of time, that for different people at different stages in their life, different stages in their educational development, different stages in their career, are going to be interested in pursuing a variety of different options. And the key for us is to get a little bit outside the world we've all lived in, which is very structured and built successfully over the course of decades, and to be able to say, maybe all of these models work for some people, but we also need to think about models that are going to work for many others, especially in a world in which it's going to be so important for people to continue to grow and develop over the course of their careers. To sit here and have 200,000 open jobs right now in the Commonwealth of Mass, up and down the stack, and at the same time know there are so many people out there struggling to find an opportunity for meaningful and work that pays. It's a very tough spot to be in, and it's one we ought to be able to solve for, and to solve for in a way that works successfully for the vast majority of the people who find themselves on either end of that equation. And I really want to thank you all for being here. I'm sure this is going to be a terrific start to a really big conversation and a whole series of positive initiatives. And we all look forward to working with you through our commission and through other means over the course of the next several years. Thank you very much.